The story opens with the sound of rain hitting the roof, a dark rhythm accompanying the darkest night in a little girl's life. The year is 2006, in a house that should have been a shelter, but instead turned into a suffocating prison. Inside that house, a 9-year-old girl named Baek Ah-jin stands in the corner of the room, her body stiff, her eyes wide open, staring at a single spot at the bottom of the stairs. Right there lies the body of her mother, Lim Sun-ye. The woman who was supposed to be her protector is now lying there like a doll that has been tossed aside. Her neck is twisted at the wrong angle, her eyes are open and empty, staring at the ceiling, and blood is starting to seep slowly from the back of her head, forming a red pool spreading across the old wooden floor. A few meters away from the body stands a man, Baek Sun-gyu, Ah-jim's biological father. He just pushed his own wife down the stairs. It was not an accident. It was not because she slipped, but it was because of overflowing anger, an argument that reached its peak, and hatred that had been piling up for a long time in that weak man's chest. But there was one eyewitness, Ah-jin. That little girl is standing right next to her mother's body. However, the most terrifying thing was not what she saw, but rather what she did not do. Ah-jin is not crying. She is not screaming for help. She is not running to hug her mother's corpse. She just stands there silently, like a statue made of ice, as if the scene in front of her is just a boring movie. No tears are flowing down her cheeks, no sobs are escaping her lips, just a gripping silence, a silence even colder than the body lying on the floor. When her father turns and looks at her with eyes full of fear, Ah-jin just returns the stare with a blank face. Then, without a single word, she turns around and walks away, leaving her father standing all alone next to her mother's body. Those small footsteps fade away, disappearing into the darkness of the hallway, as if her mother's death was no more important than a cold breakfast. That night, something inside Baek Ah-jin died along with her mother. Empathy, compassion, or maybe even the ability to feel sad. It all vanished, replaced by a dark and dangerous emptiness.
Time passed ruthlessly. Sun-ye's funeral was held simply, without many mourners. Sun-gyu managed to convince the police that it was an accident. The case was closed. No one was suspicious. No one asked the little girl what she actually saw that night. Life went on, but Ah-jin's hell just changed its shape. Not long after her mother died, Sun-gyu got married again, a marriage that was too fast, too suspicious. The replacement was a woman named Hwang Ji-sun, a wealthy widow who owned a massive house and had abundant wealth. The marriage wasn't about love, but a transaction. Sun-gyu gained access to wealth, while Ji-sun gained who knows what, maybe just a puppet she could control. Ji-sun brought along her son from a previous marriage, a handsome teenager named Jun-so. On the surface, they looked like a happy new family. Big house, luxury cars, a comfortable life. But behind closed doors, Ah-jin lived in a different kind of torment. Ji-sun viewed Ah-jin not as a stepdaughter, but as a parasite that had to be exterminated. The woman was cruel in a subtle way, in a way that left no physical marks, but wounded the soul. She belittled Ah-jin at every opportunity, calling her trash, a useless child, a burden that shouldn't exist in that house. But what was worse was the secret plan she cooked up with Sun-gyu. They planned to get rid of Ah-jin permanently. They even intended to sell private videos of Ah-jin, recordings that shouldn't exist, humiliating recordings. For most kids Ah-jin's age, this would be the end of hope, but Ah-jin was different. The girl didn't just surrender. After years of living in hell, she had learned the single most valuable lesson. Information is the sharpest weapon, and she held a nuclear weapon in her hands. Ah-jin knew the family's biggest secret, a secret that even Sun-gyu didn't know. Jun-so, her handsome, kind-hearted stepbrother who always had a friendly smile, wasn't the biological son of Ji-sun's late wealthy husband. Jun-so was the result of Ji-sun's affair with the family's private driver, a lowly man hired just to drive cars. If this secret leaked, the entire inheritance Ji-sun was currently enjoying would vanish vanish. Jun-so would be kicked out of the family. The wealth would be snatched away by the late husband's relatives. Ji-sun's luxurious life would be destroyed in an instant. So, with a cold stare far beyond her years, Ah-jin called her stepmother. Ah-jin looked at her, and with a voice that was quiet but sharp as a knife, she whispered the secret. Ji-sun's face went pale instantly. She realized that this little girl she thought was weak actually had her by the throat. Ah-jin didn't ask for mercy. She simply gave a simple ultimatum. Don't touch me, or everything will be destroyed. The threat worked, at least for a while, but Ji-sun was a woman who didn't give up easily. She was full of vengeance, full of hatred. She couldn't accept the reality that a small child dared to threaten her, so she plotted her revenge. One day, when the house was quiet, when no one was around but Ji-sun and Ah-jin, Ji-sun dragged Ah-jin into the bathroom. Without warning, without a word, the woman shoved Ah-jin's head into the bathtub filled with water. Cold water flooded Ah-jin's mouth and nose, entering her lungs, making her choke and panic. But fate had other plans. The bathroom door burst open. Jun-so, who happened to come home earlier than usual, saw the horrific scene. He immediately ran over, pulled his mother away, and lifted Ah-jin's limp body out of the water. Ah-jin coughed, spitting out water, gasping for air. Jun-so stared at his mother with eyes full of confusion and disappointment, but Ji-sun just stood there silently, her face full of suppressed rage. From that day on, Jun-so became Ah-jin's protector. He didn't know the whole truth, didn't know the secret of his birth, didn't know about Ah-jin's threat. He only knew that his stepsister was living in danger, and he felt obligated to protect her. To Jun-so, it was an act of kindness. To Ah-jin, it was the perfect tool.
Years passed. Ah-jin grew into a beautiful teenager with a soft face but cold eyes. She now attended high school, an institution filled with cruel social hierarchies. At that school, Ah-jin faced a new enemy, a teacher named Ms. Kwok, a middle-aged woman who was bitter and full of resentment toward the world. Ms. Kwok was the type of teacher who enjoyed using her power to torment students, and her target this time was Ah-jin. Ms. Kwok often humiliated Ah-jin in front of the class. The woman called her an orphan with no future, a child from a broken family who should be ashamed of herself. Every word that came out of Ms. Kwok's mouth was poison designed to destroy Ah-jin's self-esteem. But Ah-jin didn't cry. Ah-jin started investigating Ms. Kwok's private life, and she found it. Ms. Kwok was having an affair with a married man. They often met at cheap motels on the outskirts of town. Once everything was complete, Ah-jin leaked it all anonymously. The photos circulated among teachers, parents, and even reached the cheated wife's husband. The scandal exploded. Ms. Kwok was fired from the school. Her reputation was ruined. Her marriage fell apart. Her life collapsed in a matter of days. Meanwhile, Ah-jin sat calmly in class, smiling faintly at the destruction, with no one knowing she was the mastermind behind it all. But that victory wasn't enough to satisfy Ah-jin's thirst for power. In the same school, there was a rich girl named Sim Sung-hee. She was pretty, popular, and most importantly, arrogant. Sung-hee came from an influential business family, and she used that power to oppress anyone she considered beneath her. Ah-jin was one of her targets. When Ah-jin managed to get into the debate team thanks to her intelligence, Sung-hee felt threatened. She used her father's influence to kick Ah-jin off the team, accusing Ah-jin of not meeting the requirements due to family financial issues. Ah-jin was kicked out of the only place where her intelligence was recognized, but she didn't get angry. She just smiled coldly, then began plotting a more complex revenge. Ah-jin manipulated a quiet student named Kim Jae-oh. The kid was always ignored, always lonely, and very easily influenced. Ah-jin approached him with fake friendliness, giving him the attention he never got from anyone else. Jae-oh fell into her trap unknowingly. Together with Jae-oh and Jun-so, who was always always loyal to protecting her, Ah-jin set the perfect trap. They stole missing phones and money from several students, then planted them in Sung-hee's locker. When the locker was opened in front of all the students, the evidence was found. Sung-hee screamed hysterically, saying she was framed, that she never stole anything, but no one believed her. Even her once loyal friends turned on her, calling her a thief, a hypocrite, a criminal. Sung-hee wailed, her reputation destroyed in an instant. She was expelled from school, her family name tarnished. Meanwhile, Ah-jin stood in the crowd watching the destruction, her face calm, her eyes cold, but inside there was a burning satisfaction. That night, Ah-jin stood in front of the mirror in her room. She stared at her beautiful reflection, a face that could deceive anyone. She smiled faintly, a smile that never reached her eyes. Ah-jin realized something fundamental about this world. People don't care about the truth. They only care about what they see, about what they believe. And if she could control their perception, she could control everything. She was no longer a victim. She was now a player, and the game had just begun. At school, the day seemed ordinary for everyone, except for those whose names had been touched by Ah-jin. Sung-hee, who once stood at the top of their social circle, was now a name whispered in hushed tones and laughed at behind her back. Her scandal, orchestrated by Ah-jin, still echoed through the school halls, a reminder that a reputation in this place could vanish in a single moment that was accidentally caught. But Sung-hee wasn't the type to give up so easily. Beneath her shame, she harbored a deep-seated grudge. When her eyes caught sight of a shabby old man wandering near the school gates, a cruel idea crossed her mind. The man's clothes were filthy, his hair disheveled, and his steps unsteady, as if he had no clear destination. Sung-hee recognized that face. Baek Sun-gyu, Ah-jin's biological father. This was her chance. If Ah-jin's reputation couldn't be ruined by gossip, then she would be destroyed by humiliation. Sung-hee approached with a feigned, friendly smile, inviting him inside with the promise of some cash. Sun-gyu, whose life now revolved around booze and debt, followed without asking many questions. While class was in session, Sung-hee walked in with confident strides, dragging the old man into the room. All eyes automatically turned to them. With a theatrical, loud voice, she introduced the ragged man as Baek Ah-jin's father. Snickers began to ripple through the room, quickly growing into whispers and condescending glares. Ah-jin remained silent in the distance. Her face showed neither shock nor shame. The seconds seemed to stretch out, giving Sung-hee a chance to savor her revenge. But before the situation could escalate any further, one person made a move. Jun-so. Jun-so approached calmly. In front of the entire student body, he declared that the man was his father. Without giving anyone a chance to ask questions, he dragged Sun-gyu out of the classroom, promising to give him the money he asked for. The class went dead silent. Sung-hee's plan crumbled in an instant. Outside, Jun-so kept his promise only halfway. He handed over a small fraction of the money he had mentioned and warned the man never to go near Ah-jin again until she finished school. Sun-gyu accepted without much protest. For a man like him, a little cash today mattered more than the consequences of tomorrow. Meanwhile, back in the classroom, Ah-jin left behind something that seemed trivial, a notebook. To others, it was just an ordinary book, but to Jun-so, whose eyes never stopped watching Ah-jin, every little thing she did always felt like a hidden message. That same day, far from the chaos of school, the adult world was moving in a way that would shift the trajectory of Ah-jin's life. So Mi-ri, the CEO of an entertainment agency, had been observing the commotion at the school from a distance. She wasn't interested in the scandal, but in the figure at its center. Baek Ah-jin's face remained calm amidst the chaos, capturing Mi-ri's attention far more than mere beauty ever could. She approached Ah-jin outside the school grounds, introducing herself without beating around the bush. Mi-ri offered something Ah-jin had never openly sought, yet secretly suited her perfectly: a stage.
the spotlight, and a world where one's image could be fully curated. Becoming a news anchor, a public figure, or the face of a corporation, it all started with that first contract. Ah-jin declined right then and there. Her refusal wasn't due to a lack of interest. It was because she hadn't finished clearing her first small stage yet. Mi-ri, seasoned in reading people, knew very well that a girl like this wasn't truly closing the door, only postponing it. She handed over her business card and walked away. On the other side of the city, Kim Jae-oh sprinted through narrow alleys toward his home. A message from his sister made his chest tight. His father was on a rampage again. When he arrived, the scene inside was a nightmare he had seen all too often. Empty bottles, screaming, and his little sister curled up in the corner, weeping. His father, heavily intoxicated, gripped a kitchen knife and brandished it at his sister. Acting on reflex, Jae-oh tackled him from behind, trying to wrestle the knife away. They struggled in the chaos, feet dragging, a table overturning. In a single second he could never take back, the knife's direction shifted and plunged into his father's own stomach. Everything went silent. His father collapsed, groans of pain escaping his mouth. Blood began to pool on the floor. His sister screamed. Jae-oh stood, frozen, breathing heavily, his hands stained with blood. In a panic, Jae-oh sent his sister to their aunt's house, forcing himself to think clearly. Only one name appeared in his mind when he searched for someone who could guide him out of this seemingly hopeless situation: Baek Ah-jin. The phone was picked up with a calm voice. On the other end, Ah-jin listened to the chaotic story without interrupting. After Jae-oh's sobbing subsided a little, she gave him the one route that made the most sense and was the most useful. Turn yourself in. Go with your head bowed. Confess that you hurt your father while protecting your sister, and cry just enough, not too dramatically, but enough to shift the narrative from a perpetrator to a son acting in desperate self-defense.
A few months later, the case exploded in the local media as the No-Jang-dong patricide, the tragic narrative of a destitute teenager stabbing his own father. In court, Jae-oh followed a script that was never written down. He confessed, wept, and painted himself as a victim of prolonged abuse. The judge and jury took that background into account, labeling him a victim before a perpetrator, and ultimately handed down a sentence of 3 to 5 years in prison. After the verdict was read, the case slowly faded from public memory, but behind bars, a young man who once considered himself trash began to find a strange purpose, becoming Bae Ah-jin's most loyal pawn. Inside his cell, he drew the girl's face over and over again, the only person who ever told him his life was useful. Meanwhile, at school, the days went by as if nothing had changed. Sim Sung-hee had vanished from the radar after the scandal and transferred schools, leaving a blank space on Ah-jin's list of enemies. Ah-jin and Jun-so lived out their final year like most teenagers, studying, joking around, and thinking about the future. On the university entrance exam results board, Bae Ah-jin's name appeared as a new law student at a prestigious university. To others, it was a symbol of hope. To Ah-jin, law was the science that would gift her a new language to manipulate the system she had, until now, only played by instinct. However, the dream of college hit a hard wall named money. The entrance fees and tuition were far beyond what her part-time savings could cover. Jun-so, who was accepted into a different university, saw the dilemma and took matters into his own hands. He went to his grandfather, a wealthy businessman who was tough but had a soft spot for his grandson, to ask for a loan, not out of charity, but as an investment with interest. They negotiated. Jun-so offered to be a companion every time his grandfather went to Japan for medical treatment, to act as a secretary, and to perform small tasks as the interest on the loan he would eventually repay. The grandfather, amused to see his grandson mixing blood ties with business logic, finally agreed. He even packaged the money as a scholarship program under the company's name, making Ah-jin its very first recipient. At a modest soup shop, Jun-so delivered the news. He told her that Ah-jin had received a full scholarship, acting as if this were a stroke of luck that had fallen from the sky. Ah-jin read the transfer proof and documents, then stared at the young man sitting across from her, the person who had repeatedly put his own future up as collateral to pay the price for her life. Jun-so dismissed Ah-jin's concern concerns about repayment and consequences, insisting that the most important thing now was for her to enter university. The rest could be thought about later after the dream was achieved. But the past doesn't stop just because someone wants to start a new chapter. Sun-gyu returned, this time not as a drunkard at the school gate, but as a direct threat invading Ah-jin's private space. On the night she came home carrying new hope, she found her father already waiting. The man claimed to know his daughter was accepted into college and insisted that the tuition money belonged to the family, not to the girl who had saved it. He forced his way in, rummaged through her bag and wallet, touching the very thing Ah-jin had protected with all her heart, her chance to escape the cycle of poverty. When he found where the money was stashed, Sun-gyu wasn't satisfied with just taking it. He insulted, kicked, and beat his daughter, trampling her body as if she weren't a human being, but a doormat used to wipe off mud. Amidst the kicks and the pain that reignited childhood memories, her mother's abuse, the fall down the stairs, the suffering without a defender, Ah-jin realized one thing: as long as this man was still alive, freedom was nothing but an empty word. A few days later, when graduation day arrived, friends were busy taking photos with their caps and gowns and wide smiles. Ah-jin arrived with wounds on her face that she claimed came from falling down, and there was no family there for her. She posed in front of the school camera, lips forming a faint smile, eyes empty. In that crowd, Jun-so, arriving late, ran up to her, calling her name and congratulating her. They walked side by side through the bustling streets, each lost in their own thoughts. On the way, Ah-jin's attention was drawn to a small commotion, an adult man chasing a pickpocket and taking him down with reflexive athletic movement. People clapped, praising the man's bravery. Ah-jin's face, which had been stiff all day, suddenly softened. In her eyes, the man named Baek Jung-ho, a cafe owner, wasn't just a good Samaritan upholding justice, but a potential pawn possessing two critical traits: a sense of responsibility and an obsession with protecting others. When she later applied for a job at the same cafe and was easily accepted, it seemed like a sweet coincidence to outsiders. For Ah-jin, there were no coincidences, only a new stage where she arranged her next act, a place where she was no longer a poor high school girl, but a goddess in the making, preparing to draw her first blood using someone else's hands. Several days later, Ah-jin went about her daily life as a worker at Choi Jung-ho's cafe. However, hidden beneath it all was a dark tragedy from the past. Choi Jung-ho, he wasn't merely a friendly cafe owner. He was a former baseball legend, a prodigy whose career was shattered into pieces by a fatal injury. In a quiet corner of the cafe, Ah-jin secretly observed her boss. She saw Jung-ho often re-watching recordings of his old matches, staring at the screen with a mixture of pride and deep sorrow. Ah-jin's coworker, Yusik, recounted that Jung-ho was once a candidate for the best batting title, a feared home run king. However, that glittering career ended when he tried to tag out an opponent named Kwak Eun-hyuk, who made a reckless slide, causing Jung-ho's wrist to break and requiring 3 surgeries that failed to restore his ability. What intrigued Ah-jin even more, while simultaneously making her look down on him, was Jung-ho's attitude toward the person who destroyed his future. Instead of hating him, Jung-ho still supported Kwak Eun-hyuk, calling him a friend and cheering for his success. To Ah-jin, this forgiving attitude and excessive sense of justice were not virtues, but gaping loopholes. She viewed Jung-ho as a pushover, someone too good for a cruel world, and therefore very easy to control. Ah-jin began to formulate a plan in her mind, positioning Jung-ho as the main pawn in her game of self-defense. Meanwhile, Ah-jin's popularity at the cafe exploded uncontrollably. Her cold yet captivating beauty spread widely on social media, attracting the attention of many male customers who came just to see her or ask for her phone number. Even Sarah Mi-ri, the ambitious entertainment agency CEO, caught wind of Ah-jin's trail again and ensured that the girl hadn't signed a contract with anyone yet. However, this fame brought dangerous side effects. Someone began terrorizing the cafe with mysterious phone calls, asking for Ah-jin's whereabouts in a threatening tone, making Jung-ho increasingly vigilant and protective of his new employee. On the other hand, Ah-jin's personal life was becoming increasingly suffocating. Her biological father, Baek
Sun-gyu reappeared like an endless nightmare. The man didn't come to apologize, but to extort. He knew Ah-jin now had a job and connections with wealthy people. With the cruelty of a loan shark, Sun-gyu threatened to do terrible things if Ah-jin didn't give him money. He even hurled disgusting threats to sell Ah-jin to a remote island or force her to become an actress for money, claiming that because he brought Ah-jin into the world, he had the right to do whatever he wanted with his daughter's body. Ah-jin, who was usually calm, felt an overwhelming pressure. She realized that giving money was only a futile, temporary solution. Her father was a bottomless pit who would never be satisfied. Ah-jin tried to hold out in her old house, rejecting Junso and Jung-ho's suggestions to move on the grounds that she could handle her father. However, behind her refusal, Ah-jin was actually setting the stage. She needed that house as the execution site of her plan. In mounting desperation, Ah-jin tried to find a shortcut through Yoon Jun-so. On the quiet rooftop of his house, she made a shocking request. Ah-jin asked Jun-so to hit her, to injure her so it would look as if she had just been attacked by a stalker. She wanted to create physical evidence to manipulate the situation. However, Jun-so refused outright. The young man, still haunted by the trauma of seeing Ah-jin abused in the past, could not bear to raise a hand against the girl he loved. Jun-so's refusal made Ah-jin realize one thing. Jun-so's heart was too soft. He lacked the capacity for violence that Ah-jin needed right now. Ah-jin needed a tool that was stronger, more reactive, and easier to trigger. Her thoughts turned back to Choi Jung-ho. Ah-jin began to unleash her manipulation upon Jung-ho. One morning, she arrived at the cafe with a scratch on her neck, a wound she had inflicted herself or allowed to happen during a confrontation with her father. When Jung-ho asked anxiously, Ah-jin lied with a convincing, innocent face. She fabricated a story that a stalker had been following her for several days and had attacked her. She even claimed that the police couldn't do much due to a lack of evidence, provoking Jung-ho's frustration and protective instincts. The bait was taken perfectly. Jung-ho, who possessed a heroic spirit, immediately felt responsible. He wouldn't let Ah-jin go home alone, offering her rides, and even gave her pepper spray as a self-defense tool. Jung-ho emphasized that Ah-jin could use it any time, stating that he was ready to be a protector for the people around him. Ah-jin listened with an inscrutable gaze, realizing that she had found the weapon she needed. The terror orchestrated by Ah-jin escalated. She staged a scenario where her house appeared to have been broken into. She ransacked her own belongings, creating a convincing mess. When Jung-ho saw the chaotic state of the house, his worry peaked. He begged Ah-jin to stay elsewhere or move to a safer studio at his expense, but Ah-jin gently refused, insisting on staying there one more night with the excuse of waiting for Jun-so to return. Ah-jin needed that night. That night, Jung-ho drove Ah-jin home. At her front door, Ah-jin found, or more accurately had posted, a horrifying message reading, "You're next." Seeing the writing, Jung-ho burned with rage. He chased after the shadow of someone he thought was the stalker, leaving Ah-jin alone for a moment. Ah-jin used that moment to ensure that Jung-ho's fear had reached a boiling point. When Jung-ho returned empty-handed and breathing heavily, he was increasingly convinced that Ah-jin's life was in grave danger. Before leaving, Jung-ho left a baseball bat at Ah-jin's door, telling the girl to use it if anything happened. Ah-jin stared at the bat, realizing that all her preparations were complete. The peak scenario began. Ah-jin contacted her father, Baek Sung-yu, and told him to come to the house with the promise of giving him the requested money. She arranged the meeting time with precision. When her father arrived, Ah-jin did not welcome him with fear, but with an odd, sweet smile. She handed a package to her father, calling it a birthday gift. arrived. Inside the package was a knitted hat. The hat was no ordinary accessory. It was the key to Ah-jin's entire fabrication. The hat was identical to the one worn by the figure of the stalker that Jung-ho had glimpsed. After her father put on the hat, Ah-jin handed him a bag that was supposed to contain money. However, Sun-gyu opened it greedily and found only a pile of scrap paper. The man's face went red with rage. He realized he was being played. "Do you want to die?" he growled. Ah-jin did not back down. She actually provoked her father further. "If that's what you want, just kill me," she challenged. At the same time, Ah-jin secretly made a phone call to Jung-ho's number and left the line open. Sun-gyu, blinded by rage, began beating Ah-jin. The sounds of blows, crude curses, and Ah-jin's screams for help were clearly audible on Jung-ho's phone, who was anxious elsewhere at the time. Hearing Ah-jin's screams and the voice of a man threatening to kill her, Jung-ho's blood boiled. He immediately ran out, driving his vehicle through the heavy rain toward Ah-jin's house, convinced that the crazy stalker was finally attacking. Inside the house, the torture was real. Ah-jin allowed herself to be beaten, enduring the pain to ensure Jung-ho arrived on time. She stalled for time, waiting for the moment of rescue she had written in her script. And sure enough, the door was kicked open violently. Jung-ho stood in the doorway, soaked and breathing heavily. Before him, he saw a sight that confirmed his worst fears: a man in a knitted hat, the same figure as the stalker in his imagination, choking Ah-jin on the floor. Without hesitation, driven by the instinct to save a life and exploding anger, Jung-ho swung the baseball bat he had brought. Wham! A hard blow landed squarely on Baek Sun-gyu's head. The old man collapsed instantly, his body hitting the floor with a heavy thud. Fresh blood began to pool, staining the cold wooden floor. A sudden silence enveloped the room, only broken by the sound of Jung-ho's heavy, terrified breathing. However, Ah-jin didn't let Jung-ho think straight. With flawless acting, she screamed hysterically, ordering Jung-ho to leave. "Go! Don't get involved. I'll handle this," she screamed through fake tears. Jung-ho, panicked and confused, succumbed to the command. He felt he had to protect Ah-jin by vanishing from the crime scene to avoid making the situation worse. Stumbling, Jung-ho fled into the dark night, leaving Ah-jin alone with her father's body. As soon as the sound of Jung-ho's footsteps was swallowed by the rain, Ah-jin's sobbing stopped abruptly. Her face, previously filled with terror, turned flat and cold, as if a mask she had been wearing had just been taken off. She rose slowly, ignoring the pain in her body, and walked toward her sprawled father. Once she was certain her father was lifeless, Ah-jin moved quickly and efficiently, grabbing her phone. She dialed the emergency number, 112. "Help! My father! Someone broke in and killed my father! Please save him!" she wailed into the phone, playing the role of a devastated daughter perfectly. And that night, amidst pools of blood and lies, she knew she had won. She had severed the chains that had shackled her for a lifetime, using another's hands to destroy the demon who sired her. And now she was ready to step out of hell as a terrifying victor. Afterwards, Ah-jin drifted into her subconscious, hallucinating that her father was still alive. The man sneered at Ah-jin as she managed to open her eyes, regretting that his daughter was still breathing. His words cut deeper than any knife, reminding Ah-jin that the blood flowing through her veins was the same as that of the monster she had just destroyed. Her father bid farewell with a string of curses, hoping they would never meet again, not even in hell. When Ah-jin jolted awake, gasping for air, the reality that greeted her was no less cold than the nightmare. She was in a hospital, surrounded by the sterile scent of antiseptic and the sharp gazes of law enforcement officers. On the other side of the city, in a stifling interrogation room, Choi Jung-ho sat looking exhausted and confused. The man whose only intention was to be a hero was now trapped in a web of lies woven by Ah-jin. The police grilled him with leading questions. Jung-ho, with naive honesty, admitted that the baseball bat that killed Baek Sun-gyu was his. However, he insisted that he had no intention of killing. He recounted his version. That night, he saw a man wearing a cream-colored knitted beanie choking Ah-jin in the darkness. He thought the man was the stalker who had been terrorizing Ah-jin, so he swung his bat to save the girl's life. However, Jung-ho's confession backfired. The police found no knitted hat at the crime scene. This fact made Jung-ho's story sound like a fabricated alibi. The detective interrogating him stared skeptically, questioning how Jung-ho could be so certain he saw a hat in a pitch-black room. Jung-ho fell silent, his conviction wavering, unaware that the crucial piece of evidence had been destroyed by the very girl he tried to save. Meanwhile, in her hospital room, Ah-jin faced interrogation with the composure of a chess player who is cornered but still has a move to make. The senior detective handling her case, a cunning man who cared more about closing the case than finding the truth, began to sense something was amiss. He presented irrefutable medical facts. Baek Sang-gyu died from skull fractures caused by repeated blows, not a single errant strike as Jung-ho claimed. There was a time gap between the first incapacitating blow and the final fatal blow. Ah-jin realized that her scenario had flaws. The detective began to corner her, accusing Ah-jin of being the one to deliver the final blow. He even revealed incriminating forensic findings. Fibers from a knitted hat were found in the toilet bowl at Ah-jin's house. This small, overlooked piece of evidence now threatened to dismantle Ah-jin's entire defense. However, Ah-jin did not lose her wits. Amidst the pressure, she asked for a glass of water with a feigned, trembling hand, then requested to speak with a female officer, citing an embarrassing personal reason. It was a diversion tactic, a way to buy time and reorganize her strategy. Behind the scenes, a dirtier power play was unfolding. The detective handling the case turned out to have his own agenda. He was under pressure to close the case quickly and neatly. He conspired with his superiors and outside parties to engineer a narrative. The plan was cruel but effective. Make Choi Jung-ho the primary scapegoat under the guise of excessive self-defense, while Ah-jin would be positioned as a helpless victim to trigger public sympathy. That way, the case would be closed, the police force's reputation preserved, and Ah-jin, deemed harmless, could walk free. However, the detective did not realize that he was dealing with someone far more manipulative than himself. News of Baek Sang-gyu's death spread rapidly, becoming fodder for the media. Sensational headlines plastered television screens and newspapers, depicting the tragedy in Nojongdong as the heartbreaking tale of a daughter tortured by her own father, and a former baseball athlete trapped in a fatal rescue attempt. Public sympathy poured in for Ah-jin, while Jung-ho was viewed with a mixture of pity and suspicion. However, there was one person who was not fooled by the media narrative or Ah-jin's act. That was Yoon Jun-so. The young man watched everything from afar with a shattered heart. He knew Ah-jin better than anyone. He knew that his stepsister was capable of doing unimaginable things to survive. When he heard about the hat fiber found by the police, Jun-so realized that Ah-jin was on the brink. If the police kept digging, they would uncover the truth that it was Ah-jin who had finished off her father in cold blood. Jun-so was faced with an impossible choice: let the girl he loved rot in prison or sacrifice himself for her future. His memory drifted back to the past, to the promise he had once made to always protect Ah-jin, to atone for the sins of his cruel mother. That love, mixed with guilt, drove Jun-so to take a fatal step. That night, the police station was shocked by the arrival of a young man turning himself in. Yoon Jun-so, with a pale face but burning determination, sat before the investigators and delivered a shocking confession. He claimed to be the murderer of Baek Sang-gyu. Jun-so wove a web of lies with precise detail, as if he had been preparing for it his whole life. He confessed to being Ah-jin's stalker, the mysterious figure who had been terrorizing the girl. He recounted how he hated Baek Sang-gyu because of their family's past, and how he had meticulously planned the murder. He claimed that he had drugged Baek Sang-gyu at a motel before the old man went to Ah-jin's house. The skeptical police tried to dismantle his confession. They pointed out inconsistencies in the timeline and evidence. However, Jun-so cleverly adjusted his story. He admitted that he came to Ah-jin's house that night saw Baek Sang-gyu still alive after being hit by Jung-ho, and then he was the one who delivered the final, fatal blow. He portrayed himself as an obsessed monster, a crazy and vengeful stepbrother, solely to cover up the fact that Ah-jin was the real perpetrator. Jun-so's confession sent shockwaves through the investigation. The narrative of the case shifted completely. Choi Jung-ho, who was previously the prime suspect, now looked like a person in the wrong place at the wrong time. Ah-jin, who was being detained and awaiting her fate, was suddenly told that she was free. The police informed her that her stalker, Yoon Jun-so, had turned himself in and confessed to everything. Hearing that, Ah-jin fell silent. Her world seemed to stop spinning. She never expected Jun-so to go this far. Her mind flashed back to the night of the incident, a fragment of memory she had kept to herself. That night, after she killed her father and cleaned up the evidence, she wasn't alone. Jun-so had actually come to the house. In a heartbreaking flashback, the real truth was revealed. That night, Jun-so had arrived late and found Ah-jin sitting beside her father's corpse with a vacant stare. Instead of running away or reporting Ah-jin, Jun-so chose to become a protector in the darkest sense of the word. He was the one who frantically checked the crime scene, ensuring Ah-jin was safe. He found the remaining hat fibers in the toilet that Ah-jin had missed and cleaned them up. He even went to the motel where Ah-jin's father was staying to tamper with the CCTV footage, creating a trail that seemingly placed him at the center of the crime. Jun-so didn't just turn himself in, he had been actively cleaning up the traces of Ah-jin's sin since the night of the incident, staining his own hands to keep Ah-jin's hands clean. Ah-jin walked out of the police station with unsteady steps. The air of freedom felt suffocating. She was free, but the price was Jun-so's future. At the police station gate, a luxury car was waiting for her. So Mi-ri, the CEO of Long Star Entertainment Agency, rolled down the window. The ambitious woman smiled meaningfully. She had been monitoring the case, even using her connections within the police force to ensure the scenario played out smoothly according to her wishes. So Mi-ri then invited Ah-jin for a chat, and there, a transaction of the soul took place. Mi-ri offered total protection, a brilliant career, and a new life as a star. She promised to make Ah-jin shine so brightly that her dark past could never touch her again. However, there was one absolute condition. Ah-jin had to sever ties with Yoon Jun-so forever. Mi-ri emphasized that the existence of Jun-so, a convict in a murder case, would be a stain that could destroy Ah-jin's future career. If they continued to be in contact, the truth about that night could be exposed at any moment. Ah-jin stared at the rapidly passing streets outside the window. She knew this was a crossroads. Choosing Jun-so meant choosing a life in the shadows of guilt and painful love. Choosing So Mi-ri meant choosing power, money, and worldly validation, but at the cost of eternal loneliness. With a heart she froze over once again, Ah-jin nodded. She accepted the devil's deal. Some time later, Jun-so was temporarily released pending further trial, thanks to the intervention of expensive lawyers hired by his grandfather, or perhaps So Mi-ri. Their final meeting took place in a quiet spot, far from the hustle and bustle of the world. Jun-so, looking thin and exhausted, gazed at Ah-jin with eyes that still radiated sincere love, despite having been betrayed countless times. Jun-so tried to reach for Ah-jin's hand, begging the girl to stop. He didn't ask Ah-jin to turn herself in, he only asked her to stop manipulating others, to stop hurting herself with destructive ambition. Jun-so promised to make Ah-jin happy in a simple, human way. He was willing to endure prison as long as Ah-jin could live in peace. However, Ah-jin brushed his hand away. With a bone-chillingly cold voice, she spoke cruel words of farewell. She said that Jun-so's kindness was poison to her. That kindness was a burden, a shackle that reminded her of her own weakness. Ah-jin stated that she didn't need to be saved by love. She needed power so that no one could trample on her ever again. Jun-so's sacrifice she called a foolish, futile act if the goal was merely to live a normal life. "You will never understand," Ah-jin said flatly, "because you've never walked in my shoes. You don't know what it feels like to live as trash that has to eat other trash just to survive." Ah-jin asserted that their paths had to part here. She would climb to the top of the world, a place where no one could hurt her again, while Jun-so had to stay at the bottom, bearing a sin he did not commit. Those words shattered Junso's last defenses. He realized that the little girl he wanted to protect was truly gone, replaced by a cold and ambitious stranger. Ajin turned and walked away, leaving Junso rooted in silence. She didn't look back. Her footsteps were steady toward the future she had designed, even though she knew that road would be lonely.
Several years later, under the glittering spotlights of the Busan International Film Festival, a grand stage where dreams and illusions merged into one on the red carpet that stretched out like a river of blood, Hyo In-gang, the most worshipped actor of the moment, stepped out of a luxury car. He was not alone. His hand reached out, welcoming a woman who that night would alter the landscape of the entertainment industry, Baek Ah-jin. The world held its breath as they walked side by side. Ah-jin, clad in a stunning dress, radiated an aura of elegance rare for a newcomer. Camera flashes exploded ceaselessly, as if wanting to capture every inch of the couple touted as the future of Korean cinema. Media narratives adored them, describing Ah-jin as a star who captivated with an unusual poise. However, behind that faint smile and practiced wave, a much darker game was hidden. To Ah-jin, In-gang by her side was not a lover, but a trophy, a golden stepping stone she had to tread upon to reach higher peaks. She held the man's hand not out of love, but out of a need for public validation. That night, after the frenzy of the festival died down, the camera shifted to a quiet, luxury apartment. There, a pitiful reality was revealed. Lena, a top actress whose position was beginning to be threatened, arrived heavily drunk. She barged into In-gang's apartment, debasing herself for a second chance. Lena begged, cried, and apologized for past mistakes, hoping to reclaim the heart of the man who now belonged to the public and to Ah-jin. However, In-gang stared at her with profound weariness. The man rejected Lena's touch, reminding her that their relationship had ended long ago. Lena, in her desperation, realized something painful. In-gang was helping Ah-jin not merely out of coincidence, but because of a request from So Mi-ri, the CEO of their agency. A burning anger flared in Lena's eyes as she realized she was being systematically displaced by the very system that had once built her up. She left the apartment with a shattered heart and a vengeance that began to smolder.
The following day, the filming set became a silent battlefield. Ah-jin and Lena had to act opposite each other in a scene where Ah-jin's character begs for help. However, Lena turned the script into an instrument of torture. Repeatedly, Lena intentionally sabotaged the scene. She halted filming, complaining to the director that she couldn't act because of Ah-jin's gaze. Lena called the eyes creepy, as if they could slice through steel. She accused Ah-jin of staring at her with a hatred that made her uncomfortable. The director and crew felt frustrated, begging Lena to be professional for the sake of the ballooning production budget. However, Ah-jin remained calm. She didn't defend herself with harsh words. She simply stared at Lena with a flat gaze that actually validated Lena's fear. In Ah-jin's eyes, Lena was not a senior to be respected, but prey, struggling before being pounced upon. Ah-jin knew Lena's anger was a sign of weakness, proof that the old queen was starting to fear her own shadow. Amidst the production chaos, So Mi-ri, the CEO holding the reins behind the scenes, was arranging her chess pieces. In-gang met her at the office asking for permission to officially announce his breakup with Lena. In-gang wanted to maintain a clean image for a major advertising contract with the global brand Hadair, which demanded a real couple. Mi-ri, with her cold calculation, asked In-gang to be patient a little longer. She also left a special message. In-gang must look after Ah-jin on set, treating her like family. This request further solidified Ah-jin's privileged position in the agency's eyes. After the meeting, Mi-ri handled the Lena problem. She didn't use subtle persuasion. When Lena raged because she felt undefended, Mi-ri played her ace card. She reminded Lena of an incident in the past, a drunk driving accident. The incident, which should have destroyed Lena's career, was successfully covered up because her manager, Hyung-hee, had turned herself herself in to the police as the fall guy. Miri emphasized that she held a shackle file for every artist, a collection of evidence of crimes that could destroy their lives in an instant if they dared to disobey. Lena fell silent, pale as a sheet, realizing that her neck was in Miri's grasp. On the other side of town, at a luxury beauty salon, fate brought Ajin and Lena once again. The atmosphere instantly froze. Lena, her pride still wounded, tried to intimidate Ajin. She asked what dirty secret Miri held on Ajin that made the girl so protected. However, Ajin replied with deadly calm. She didn't answer the question, but instead told Lena to look in the mirror. Ajin said the reason Lena was replaced wasn't because of anyone else, but because of herself. Those words slapped Lena harder than any physical blow, leaving her with unvented rage. As Ajin stepped out of the salon building, she felt someone's presence. A delivery motorcycle stopped not far from her. The rider took off his helmet, and there stood a figure from the unforgettable past, Kim J.O. The young man had been released from prison. His eyes stared at Ajin with unchanged longing and loyalty, as if the years behind bars were merely a brief pause in his devotion. J.O. had returned, ready to be the shadow that protected and served his queen. Returning to her routine, Ajin began executing her new strategy. She realized that to destroy Lena, she needed an ally from the inside. She approached Hyungi, her current manager, who used to be Lena's manager. Inside the car speeding through the city, Ajin asked in a gentle tone about Hyungi's past with Lena. She dug into old wounds, asking if Lena often treated her poorly. Hyungi, innocent and loyal, initially hesitated, but Ajin manipulated her emotions skillfully. She positioned herself as a caring friend, promising to protect Hyungi if Lena dared to hurt her again. Furthermore, Ajin planted the seeds of rebellion. She told Hyungi about the shackle file Miri kept in Miri's desk drawer, the file containing proof of Hyungi's sacrifice for Lena. Ajin persuaded Hyungi to take the file if things got worse, as if for Hyungi's own good, when in reality it was a move to secure a weapon for herself.
Meanwhile, Yoon Jun-so's world was also in turmoil. He was now known as a best-selling novelist under the pen name Yoon Sok-ha. At a crowded book signing event, the past he wished to bury came knocking. His own mother, Ajin's stepmother, appeared in the queue. The woman hadn't come to offer congratulations, but to cause a scene. She screamed, demanding her rights as the mother who raised Jun-so, accusing her son of being unfilial for ignoring her. Security dragged the woman out, but the damage was done. Jun-so watched his mother with a vacant stare, his heart freezing further from the poison of his own family. J.O., on the other hand, sought to atone for his sins in silence. He visited his aunt's house where his younger sibling lived. He left an envelope containing his hard-earned money for his sibling's school fees. J.O. knew he could never be a source of pride as a brother again, but he vowed to spend the rest of his life ensuring his sibling lacked for nothing. He asked his aunt to keep sending photos of his sibling, the only light in his life other than Ajin. Lena's ambition to stage a comeback led her to a new plan. She wanted to rebrand her image as more intellectual. She set her sights on Jun-so, the popular author, as a tool for this rebranding. Lena arranged a meeting through her connections, hoping to create a Meet the Author segment with him. At a cafe, Lena met with Jun-so. She tried to flirt, inquiring about Jun-so's personal life, but Jun-so responded with cold politeness, maintaining a thick wall between them. The conflict reached a boiling point when Ajin's stepmother, desperate from being ignored by Jun-so, stormed the Longstar agency office. The woman barged into So Miri's office, causing a massive scene. She claimed to be Ajin's mother and demanded money. She threatened to expose Ajin's dark past, her criminal biological father and alcoholic biological mother. She screamed that Ajin was dangerous, damaged goods. Ajin, having just arrived at the office, witnessed the spectacle. She didn't run. She walked in with her head held high, confronting the woman who had tormented her throughout her childhood. Their exchange was cold and sharp. Her stepmother sneered at Ajin, reminding her that dirty blood flowed through her veins and accusing her of being her own father's murderer. The woman claimed she knew the truth, that it was Ajin who had actually finished off her father, not anyone else. Ajin dismissed her with a gaze that implied if the woman dared to stand in her way, she wouldn't hesitate to destroy her. After the woman left, Ajin apologized to Miri with a stoic expression, promising to work harder to make up for the mess. Miri stared at Ah-jin, realizing that her greatest asset came with very dangerous baggage. The night of the Longstar Agency's 7th anniversary party arrived. This was the stage Ah-jin had prepared for her final execution of Lena. Every industry heavyweight was in attendance. Lena arrived brimming with confidence, linking arms with Jun-so, whom she had coerced into attending, hoping to ignite jealousy in In-gang. Amidst the festivities, Lena cornered Ah-jin and Hyung-yi. She believed she had won. She thought Hyung-yi had tipped her off about the location of the secret file on Miri's desk. Lena planned to seize that file to secure her freedom. In the main ballroom, a video played on a giant screen, a montage of Longstar artists' career journeys. Initially, the video proceeded normally, showcasing the achievements of In-gang and others. However, the screen suddenly shifted. CCTV footage appeared. The images were clear and undeniable. Lena in the underground parking lot, slapping Ah-jin, hurling abuse and forcing her to her knees. Lena's arrogant voice boomed throughout the room. "Kneel and beg me." A deathly silence descended upon the party. The guests' expressions morphed into shock and disgust. Lena's reputation as the sweet, national little sister shattered into pieces in mere seconds. Lena stood frozen, realizing her career was over. Ah-jin stood in the distance, watching the screen with an expressionless face, savoring the fruits of her scheme. After the video ended, chaos ensued. Lena fled the room in unbearable shame. Ah-jin followed her into a quiet corridor. There, the roles were reversed. Ah-jin cornered the trembling Lena. With a soft yet terrifying voice, Ah-jin echoed Lena's own words, "Isn't it easy? You just have to swallow your pride." Ah-jin offered a false truce. She claimed she was only joking, that she wouldn't spread the video further if Lena stopped bothering her. It was total domination. Ah-jin had completely crushed Lena's spirit. However, Ah-jin's victory was short-lived. As she turned to return to the party, a male waiter approached her with a tray of drinks. Ah-jin looked at the man's face, and her blood ran cold. That was no ordinary waiter. It was the corrupt detective who had handled her father's murder case, the man who knew that Jung-ho was merely a scapegoat. The man smiled slyly, whispering that he couldn't stop thinking about Ah-jin. He had come to collect a debt. He knew Ah-jin's secret, and he viewed her success as a goldmine for extortion. "I will do everything to prove you guilty," he threatened. The threat was real. Ah-jin, who just felt on top of the world, was dragged back into the shadows of her bloody past. Afterward, Ah-jin went to Jun-so's house. She went inside, seeking refuge in the one place she considered safe, even though she constantly denied it. Jun-so was there, waiting for her. Ah-jin sat on the sofa, her body exhausted, her defenses crumbling. She looked at Jun-so with teary eyes, the eyes of a child lost in a dark forest. "Jun-so," she called out softly, "help me." Jun-so looked at her with a mixture of pain and undying love. "I want to learn to love him. In-gang," she continued, her voice trembling. "Teach me how to love him." The sentence hung in the air, heartbreaking yet horrifying. Ah-jin wasn't asking to be taught to love because her heart had been moved. She was asking as a survival strategy. She knew that to secure her position, to fight off the detective's threat, and to keep climbing, she needed Ha In-gang completely. She needed to manipulate the actor's feelings perfectly, and for that, she needed to learn to mimic a love she had never possessed. Jun-so fell silent, staring at the girl he loved, begging for help to fake love for another man. It was the cruelest request imaginable, yet he knew he could not refuse. Outside the window, the night deepened, concealing two broken souls bound together in an endless tragedy. Several days later, the morning atmosphere on the filming set felt so lively, but not for In-gang. The man had just finished an emotionally draining scene, but his mind drifted far into the past, to a memory he had buried deep all this time. In front of Ah-jin, In-gang finally opened up his old wounds. He told her about his idol group days, about Ji-hyuk,
his highly talented bandmate who had to retire early due to an incident with a macaron containing peanuts. In-gang confessed with a trembling voice that he knew the macaron was dangerous for Ji-hyuk, who had a severe nut allergy, yet he chose to remain silent. He let Ji-hyuk eat it, allowing the incident to happen, simply because he wanted to take Ji-hyuk's position as the host. That guilt had haunted him for years, making him feel undeserving of the success he possessed now. Ajin listened to that confession with a face full of empathy, but behind her gaze, she was calculating her moves. To Ajin, In-gang's weakness was not a tragedy, but a crack she could exploit to bind the man even tighter. After that emotional moment, Ajin went home. However, the peace in her apartment was disturbed by the incessant ringing of the phone. On the other end, the heavy voice of Park Dae-ho, the corrupt detective who had handled her father's death case, sounded threatening. The man didn't beat around the bush. He knew Ajin's secret. He knew the truth behind Baek San-gyu's death, and he wanted payment for his silence. Dae-ho forced Ajin to come meet him at an exclusive nightclub. With heavy steps but a composed face, Ajin complied with the demand. She arrived at the boisterous nightclub, a place where music thumped loudly and cigarette smoke billowed in the air. However, she didn't find Dae-ho there physically. Instead, he contacted her and began talking about Ajin's future over the phone. He threatened to destroy Ajin's newly rising career if his demands were not met. Ajin stared coldly into the void, realizing she was dealing with a leech that would never be satisfied. At the same time, In-gang, who was also at the club to meet his friends, accidentally saw Ajin entering a VIP room. Suspicion and jealousy began to grow in his heart. He waited outside, and when Ajin emerged with a clouded expression, In-gang immediately confronted her. An argument broke out inside the car. In-gang demanded an explanation, asking whom Ajin had met and why she was in a place like that. Ajin, exhausted and under pressure, answered curtly that she was just doing what she had to do. That answer did not satisfy In-gang. Instead, it widened the chasm between them even further. Furious, In-gang finally ordered Ajin to get out of his car, leaving the girl alone in the cold night. Meanwhile, in another corner of the city, Kim Jae-oh was starting his new life after being released from prison. He worked odd jobs, doing anything to survive. However, fate brought him back to Jun-so. Jun-so, now a successful author, hired Jae-oh to investigate someone's background. Unbeknownst to Jae-oh, the target of the investigation was Park Dae-ho, the detective who was blackmailing Ah-jin. Jae-oh performed his task efficiently. He tailed Dae-ho, tapped his phone, and recorded every conversation. From the wiretaps, Jae-oh discovered a shocking fact. Dae-ho planned to sell information about Ah-jin's past to a reporter named Lim Hee-kook, and even more shockingly, the reporter turned out to be the cousin of Lena, Ah-jin's rival actress. Jae-oh realized that Ah-jin was being besieged from all sides. He immediately reported his findings to Jun-so. Hearing the report, Jun-so felt anxious. He knew Ah-jin was in grave danger. He decided to reunite Jae-oh with Ah-jin, hoping their childhood friend could help protect the girl they loved. The meeting took place at Jun-so's apartment. When Ah-jin saw Jae-oh, her defenses crumbled for a moment. She hugged the young man, feeling the warmth of someone who genuinely cared for her unconditionally. The three sat together, reminiscing about a past that was bitter yet full of unbreakable bonds. Jae-oh gave Ah-jin a burner phone, an emergency communication tool safe from anyone's wiretaps. With the help of Jae-oh and Jun-so moving behind the scenes, Ah-jin could focus on her grand plan, conquering Heo In-gang's heart completely. She knew that the path to In-gang's heart was through his grandmother, the only family the actor had left. Ah-jin devised a bold strategy. She rented an apartment in the same building as In-gang's grandmother's, pretending to be a friendly new neighbor. One afternoon, bringing rice cakes as an excuse for a neighborly introduction, Ah-jin knocked on the door of In-gang's grandmother's unit. The old woman, who had previously met Ah-jin at a temple and was impressed with her politeness, welcomed her with open arms. Ah-jin was invited in, and she quickly managed to win the grandmother's heart. She listened to the grandmother's stories about little In-gong, pretending to be interested and touched. In-gong's grandmother, who missed having a granddaughter, felt she had found a pleasant conversational partner. She even invited Ah-jin to have dinner together, serving dishes favored by her late daughter. However, the charade was nearly ruined when In-gong suddenly came to visit. Seeing Ah-jin sitting at his grandmother's dining table, In-gong's face hardened. He felt his privacy was violated. He roughly pulled Ah-jin out of the apartment, dragging her to the quiet corridor to demand an explanation. In-gong accused Ah-jin of deliberately approaching his grandmother with ulterior motives, accusing her of being an obsessive stalker. In this cornered situation, Ah-jin's acting ability was tested. She didn't defend herself with rational arguments. Instead, she attacked In-gong's emotional side. With teary eyes and a voice trembling to hold back sobs, Ah-jin fabricated a heartbreaking story. She claimed she didn't know it was In-gong's grandmother's house. She accepted the dinner invitation because she missed her late mother so much. She spoke of gripping loneliness, of her longing for warm home-cooked meals, of how she felt all alone in this world. Ah-jin's tears, which looked so sincere, melted In-gong's heart. The man's anger slowly receded, replaced by deep guilt. He felt he had been a villain for accusing a poor girl who was only looking for a little warmth. Ah-jin successfully turned the situation around completely, from a suspect to a victim worthy of compassion.
Ah-jin turned her focus back to In-gang. She knew she had to bind him fast before any doubts could resurface. She asked In-gang to meet at a high-end restaurant to clear up the misunderstanding and mend their relationship. However, Ah-jin didn't want a smooth encounter. She needed drama. She needed In-gang to arrive in a panic, riddled with guilt and terrified of losing her. Ah-jin instructed Jae-oh to carry out a risky plan. Jae-oh had to stall In-gang on the road, ensuring he would be late for the meeting. With boundless loyalty, Jae-oh caused a minor collision with In-gang's car in the middle of the road. The incident was designed not to cause harm, but to delay. The plan worked. In-gang was stuck at the scene, panicking because his phone had fallen into a drain, leaving him unable to contact Ah-jin, who was waiting for him. The night grew late, and the temperature dropped drastically. Ah-jin stood in front of the closed restaurant, shivering in the cold. She knew In-gang would come, and she wanted him to see her enduring the cold while waiting for him. Finally, In-gang's figure appeared in the distance. He was running with all his might, breath ragged, his face filled with worry. When he arrived and saw Ah-jin standing there, freezing, he asked with a trembling voice why she hadn't gone home, why she allowed herself to freeze like this. Ah-jin looked at him with eyes deliberately made to look weary and weak, as if all her strength had been spent just waiting for him. "I was scared," Ah-jin whispered softly. "I was afraid that if I left, you would come and not find me. I don't want us to have any more misunderstandings. I wanted to wait for you." That answer was the turning point that crumbled Hyo In-gang's last defenses. The guilt of being late, combined with Ah-jin's sacrifice of waiting in the cold, completely shattered his heart. Under the dim streetlights, In-gang felt he had found a woman who sincerely loved him, a woman willing to endure pain for his sake.